here at Sun and Fun. I'm Dan Johnson speaking with an old hang gliding buddy, it turns out. You can tell by his Will's Wing hat. Jack Cripps, you have done something unusual here by making a retractable Kolb. I don't think we've seen a retractable Kolb before. We'll talk about that in a minute. But I got to go back to something you told me as we previewed for this video. You said this is your fifth Kolb that you've built?
Right.
Tell me a little bit about your Kolb history then.
Well, I wanted to have an amphibian two-place, and I started out with a Firestar 2 and then developed a gear float arrangement that attached to a standard stock Firestar 2, and then worked through that. It worked very well. I had to work in adjusting float position and got it tweaked, and my buddy goes, oh man, I want one, and so I built another one for him and did cross-country trips to South Florida and the Keys and enjoyed that a lot, and then thought, well, my wife was going, why can't we have a side-by-side seating, and went into designing the Mark III.
Sure, that's a common thing. A lot of folks, you know, I like tandem aircraft and I see the value of them, and you're a little leaner airplanes, and it's so often two-place airplanes are flown solo anyway, so why not be right in the center line? I see the values in tandem, and I like tandem, but if you got somebody with you, it's a lot nicer just to be able to turn and look at them rather than have to use mirrors or something.
And then if you're teaching and you're acquainting somebody with it, it's a little bit easier to do. So I progressed and went into, and then from there the Firestars had 503 two-strokes, and then going into the 912 series, and that changed the equation a little bit. Then a friend wanted another one, so we ended up having.
Sounds like you've got a lot of friends that need you to build airplanes.
We do, and then so we ended up in that. And one day when they developed the extra version,
the Mark III Xtra.
Mark III Xtra.
It doesn't have the float on it, but otherwise looks a lot like it.
And I saw it because we were thinking, well, how can we progress beyond the standard Mark III to fit the float? Because that plane had the Mark III standard had a little bit of rocker in the fuselage design, and the adaptation of the float wasn't ideal.
Well, I see here as I look back over my shoulder, the float is right up against the fuselage here in the cockpit area, but back here, obviously you had to do some work to address the fact that you're talking about.
Correct. And so I thought, wow, this would be a great adaptation. So I actually got with Lotus, and we modified one of their floats to fit exactly what I wanted on it, and ended up creating this. And I've had this now for several years. It's done very well.
Well, you've just done such a beautiful job of it. I mean, this is, I don't mean to disrespect you because I'm not sure a factory could do this well, but this looks like a factory-built airplane. It's just sleek and smooth and nicely finished and looks like a factory-built airplane, although I'm sure they'd be quick to say, we can't afford to put that much time into it. You got some hours invested in this, but not only that, I'm looking at the gear here because I'm just kind of fascinated with it. If I look back here, I can see where the gear normally attaches, correct?
Correct.
So you had to, you said you already did it on the Firestar 2, but you had to engineer the gear retract system here. Because you can't land like this.
Correct. Each one was a little bit different, where I took, and this particular design, I wanted the gear to be totally integrated into the structural airframe. So this float, you could take it off and you could fly this just as a retractable gear, completely independent.
So you can go both ways with this, not just by retracting or not retracting, but you can remove the whole float.
The whole float would just pop off with a few bolts.
Now that's something most seaplanes have trouble doing.
Yeah, it's not, and so.
With a couple bolts, you just said?
Well, there's an attachment bracket in the back and the front, and two attachments in the back.
And your bracket's back here?
And I've taken it off many times to make adjustments, and it's no big deal.
Wow, so that's a very different thing about any, we'll call this a float plane versus a seaplane, but so we've seen when we talked about some full Lotus floats that are amphibious now with a new arrangement, very slick deal, but of course that's two floats and the usual deal. I've always liked this monohull float. Well, it makes it almost a seaplane, not quite a float plane.
Well, what it enables you to do is when you're on the water, you want positive flotation and control, but as soon as you leave the water, you're an airplane and you want the least amount of drag you can have. Partially, you can pop up on the step and step taxi without worrying about turning over or any kind of thing relative to the wind, a little bit higher winds. So I'm strongly in favor of the hull or monohull design as the best balance of performance.
Yeah. Now, of course, you got sponsons out here on the wing here.
Correct.
Because you couldn't rely on just
Correct.
this.
Is when you're on the water, depending which way the wind is, you'll have one sponson touching or the other. But as you come up with power and it begins to lift out, those are completely
Yeah, they're out of the water pretty quick actually.
Quick.
That's just a kind of a balancing
Yes.
thing, and
Yes.
when you're got the engine off and you're just kind of
Right.
sitting there.
Right.
Now, can you beach this as well?
Oh, absolutely. One of the beauties of the full Lotus Float is you've got that very rugged structural Hdpe hull cap, and so if you were unsure of your beach area or whatever, you can literally drive this up onto the sand.
This is some really tough stuff.
It is.
Is that right?
It's the same material that they would use on the bottom of an airboat that would be, running dry land and marsh. And
Oh wow, those guys are really hard on their
It is,
equipment,
and
so
it-
this
it's very
can
strong.
hold up to that
Yeah.
same kind of duty.
Yeah.
Not that you go do that in this airplane,
Well,
because it is an
I
airplane.
do, in the sense that I'll do some scouting for waterfowl hunting and things, and find myself in unusual places, and can slip up and literally almost be on dry land, and then step out and just like a hydroplane, skim back out with enough water to take off.
So, just a ballpark estimate, Jack, because the numbers change, folks. Remember this: the numbers are not going to be the same a few years from now. But what do you think you have in the whole, as it sits here? What do you got in this airplane?
This could be billed. I've got about 50,000 in it.
About $50,000 for a seaplane.
That's right.
And one that performs really well
Yes.
and has a good long history behind it in the
Yes.
airframe. That's a remarkable deal. Now you got to put some time in it.
Absolutely.
You got a rough estimate on the number of hours you installed. Now you did some design work too, so not counting that.
Correct.
Somebody following you saying, okay, Jack's already worked it out. I just want to execute it. What kind of time do you think they'd spend building it?
If you
This aircraft.
do good attention to detail and all, you're probably in the 600 to 700 hour range of construction time.
That's not so bad,
Yeah.
though.
Yeah.
A year
Yes,
or...
absolutely. You should be able to do it in a year
Okay.
if you stick with the project.
And you got to stick with it, and you probably need some consultation and whatnot. So it might be longer than that for an average builder or whatever, but not someone who's already done it 4 times
Right.
before he started this one. Anyway, great stuff. You like the way the airplane flies with this on it?
Absolutely. It's a great stable platform in choppy air, in all different water surfaces, whether it's a little bit rough or smooth, it does really well.
Handles it all pretty well?
Yes, it does.
And you said you can just pull the float off and you got a land plane.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
I haven't, where I base is at water takeoffs and landings, even if I'm going somewhere that I land on land. So I'm not taking the float off, but for service and in the design process, it's been on and off. And a person that wanted to have something that they use partially in an amphibian situation and partly as land, you could do a few little modifications where it could literally be pit pinned off.
Wow.
And
You
set-
could make it a real quick
easy.
remove if you
Quick
wanted.
removal.
Tell
and
me
it-
how
and it
the
would work.
landing gear is retracted to get the gear up.
Well,
And it just rotates up to probably about where I'm at, right?
It touches right here.
The tire comes up and touches
Comes up
there.
and
okay.
touches the bottom.
Okay.
And I just have it simply as a circuit that I energize.
Electric then.
Electric, fully electric. Flip a switch up, flip a switch down.
And that's just the mains. I need to turn around and look at the
No,
back here.
and the way that the float works in conjunction with this tail wheel is that as you get any forward movement, it lifts the float enough that the tail wheel isn't touching. So
I see.
You don't
Just-
even have to mess with.
The tail wheel just stays where it is all
stays
the
where
time.
it is, no sweat.
And yet it works well as a
Perfect.
steering device when you're back
Absolutely.
on hard surface.
Absolutely.
How does it steer in the water?
Very good.
And
It-
all aerodynamic steering then?
Aerodynamic, the fact that your thrust is right on the center line and you're pivoting right on the step,
And the
it does
Kolbs have
fine.
always had a long couple or moment arm to the tail, so you get a lot of authority out of the tail.
You do in a real high wind situation. It can be stubborn trying to turn off the wind, but there's
Well,
just
that's true in any seaplane. though.
seaplane.
Going downwind in a seaplane with any amount of wind blowing is
to give you
its own experience.
I can step taxi downwind in 20-mile-an-hour winds with
Wow.
this airplane.
Okay, that's a lot of wind in a
And
seaplane.
turn around and come back into the wind and take off. So
great stuff.
it does a good job.
Great stuff. So,
Yep.
okay, let's tell the folks how to get a hold of the Kolb Aircraft Company. You're not with the Kolb Aircraft
Correct.
Company. You're just a loyal builder and got your airplane represented here, but we know the address. So,
Correct.
where can we send people to learn more about Kolb, and from there they can give them whatever information they can about the float product.
KolbAircraft.com, and they're familiar with this plane and what's been done. So if somebody wanted to work with the factory and recreate this, it would be no problem at all.
Some great folks up there in
Absolutely.
London, Kentucky,
London,
if I've got it
Kentucky.
right. So
Correct.
Great stuff.
Yep.
I haven't flown this one, but
Right.
I've flown a lot of the different Kolbs
Yep.
that have been out there.
Yep.
You can find all that on buydanjohnson.com or bydanjohnson.com. Thanks so much for joining Jack Cripps and myself here at Sun and Fun.